Most of the time, evidence isn't the issue for people. They don't want Christianity to be true because they don't want to give up their autonomy to a God who is in control. They want to be God.
I used to think the way that Frank Turek does in that clip. Remember 30 plus years ago, probably about 1993, there was a debate on the existence of God between William Lane Craig and famous or infamous Canadian abortion doctor Henry Morgentaler at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. I saw that debate, and they went back and forth on the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. As you can expect, Morgentaler, not himself being a philosopher of religion, did not really have sophisticated arguments for his views or against Craig's views. But in the discussion portion of the evening, somebody from the audience, probably, I'm guessing, a young budding apologist from Campus Crusade for Christ or InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, he stood and he asked a question of Morgentaler, which at the time I thought was a profound question. He said, "If Christianity were true, Dr. Morgentaler, would you bow to God?" And Morgentaler responded and said, "No, I would not. I would not bow to anyone." And at the time, I thought that was the most important question of the evening, and that it revealed that this was not really a debate about the truth of Christianity or the existence of God, but about whether Henry Morgentaler would be willing to worship God. And that's really the same kind of thing that Frank Turek is talking about in his clip from a longer video, which is that on his view, as he says, most people don't want Christianity to be true, and they would thus not accept the arguments for it, even if they were overwhelming. And I think that that is exactly the wrong way to think about skeptics, atheists, non-Christians. I think that that poisons the well of conversation with other people, and it lets the apologist off the hook so that when their arguments don't succeed, as very often they do not, in persuading their interlocutor, the apologist can just say, well, that's just because they're in sinful rebellion against God. That's why they don't accept my arguments for the existence of God or the truth of Christianity. Now, it's always possible that that is the case, but that doesn't mean it's likely that it is the case or that you can conclude and assume that it is in fact the case. It may very well be that in fact the real issue is you failed to make persuasive apologetic. Go back to Henry Morgentaler for a second. Something I didn't really think enough about, I believe, at the time was that he survived the concentration camps of World War II as a Jew. What would it mean for him in his mind to think that Christianity is true? Well, what it would mean was that there was a providential God who oversaw and allowed the Holocaust to happen. And I can understand from the perspective of someone like Henry Morgentaler, in many respects, that's a terrifying idea that there is a deity, a powerful being who foresaw from eternity that Hitler would round up 6 million Jews and gas them in concentration camps. And God allowed that to happen for his own providential purposes. That's a terrifying prospect. I can understand why someone like Morgentaler, certainly someone like Morgentaler who would experience that from the inside, would be very resistant to worshiping such a being. What that illustrates is that this is not, in fact, a simple question as Frank Turek would have us believe it is. Rather, it is a loaded question for many people. The real question, it's loaded, meaning that it conceals a controversial implicit premise. And in this case, the controversial implicit premise is that God is worship worthy. And many people believe, in fact, that if God exists, God is not worship worthy. They may believe that because of the problem of evil as expressed and experienced through things like the Holocaust or animal suffering, or perhaps the violence described in the book of Joshua as Israel invades Canaan and massacres civilians, or the problem of hell, the idea of God torturing people seemingly for eternity in eternal conscious torment, or God capriciously sending people to hell because they haven't heard the gospel and haven't had an opportunity to respond, or God punishing his own son on the cross in a penal substitutionary understanding of atonement. We could go on and on and on. In all of these cases, there could be views about God. Oh, here's one more. a crude anthropomorphized understanding of who God is, as like a bearded man in the sky who capriciously hurls thunderbolts down to the earth. God who strikes one person with cancer for no particular reason and allows the evil to flourish on earth. I mean, you could go on and on with examples. The point being that simply assuming that a person would not worship God or accept the truth of Christianity, even if it were true, and would not worship and bow to God, even if God did exist, doesn't in and of itself tell you anything about whether they are open or resistant to the truth of Christianity. What it could simply say is the Christian has failed to complete their apologetic task of showing that if God exists, then God is in fact worship worthy. So don't ask questions like that, and don't think that a question like that, which gets a negative response, somehow lets the apologist off the hook. It may, in fact, simply be evidence that the apologist has simply failed to make their own case. It is not an exoneration of you, and it is not an indictment of the skeptic.